Now I'm going to talk about the writing of the Quran in the dialects of Quraysh and sending copies to the rulers of the Muslim states. So after the death of Abu Bakr and Umar, and at the time of Uthman bin Affan, the third Caliph or Khalifa, Islam has spread throughout the world. And people started reciting in the recitation and the dialects of the companions that taught them in these different areas. Just like I mentioned, those 7 different dialects of the Quran in volume 1, if you want to refer to them, they're Bukhari, volume 6, book 61, number 513. I'll give you an example of that. In Bilad al-Sham, which was known as Jordan, Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, they used to recite with recitation and the dialect of Ubay bin Ka'b, which he had learned from the Prophet, peace be upon him. And in Kufa, in Iraq, they used to recite the dialects of Abdullah bin Mas'ud. And in Basra, which is also another city in Iraq, they used to recite in the recitation of Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. And in the 25th year of Hijrah, and in the conquest of Azerbaijan and Armenia, those two forces gathered against the Muslims, and the Muslims gathered from Bilad al-Sham, which are Jordan, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and from Iraq. And when that happened, the companions started, or the Muslims, the new Muslims, started realizing that there's difference in the dialects that they're reading or the recitation of the Quran, like what had happened between Umar and Hisham bin Hakim at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, before they knew that there's 7 different dialects. And if you want to refer to that again, it's Bukhari, volume 6, book 61, number 514. And so the Muslims started disputing amongst themselves, and one of the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, his name was Huzaifa bin al-Yaman. He was aware of what was happening, and he rushed to Uthman, the third Khalifa, and told him what was happening there and how the people were disputing. He didn't even go to his house. He went straight to the Khalifa in Medina. And so he told him in the Hadith, quote, "O commander of the believers, save the people." Uthman said, "From what?" Hudhayfa said, "In the conquest of Armenia, some people were reciting Ubay's recitation from Bilad al-Sham. And when the people of Iraq who learned the recitation of Abdullah bin Mas'ud heard them, they started disputing. So Uthman took it upon himself to bring these people together on one recitation, the dialects and the tongue of Quraysh, because it was brought down in the tongue of Quraysh, as it says in Bukhari, volume 6, book 61, number 510. Uthman said to the 3 people, or the 3 men, "In case you dispute or disagree with Zayd bin Thabit on any point in the Quran, then write it in the dialects of Quraysh. The Quran was revealed in their tongue." And I will talk more extensively about this later to come. And of course, when these 4 people, 4 men, were appointed to review and make copies of the Quran, Zayd bin Thabit was the first one, second one Abdullah bin Az-Zubayr, third one Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas, and the fourth one Abdul Rahman bin Harith bin Hisham. And in the revision of the Quran that was written by Zayd, that was written at the time of Abu Bakr, Zayd says in this same hadith, he says, "A verse from Surah Al-Ahzab was missed by me when we copied the Quran, and I used to hear the Apostle of Allah reciting it. So we searched for it and found it with Khuzama bin Thabit al-Ansari. And the verse was, amongst the believers are men who have been true in their covenant with Allah." And that was chapter 33, verse 23. So Uthman told Zayd that a great man will write with you, and if you differ with him on anything or on something, let me know. Zayd said, then we reached the verse of "Inna ayata mulkihi an ya'tiyakum at-tabutu," and Zayd wrote the word tabut like this, and Sa'd said, "No, but we're going to write it like this. And then when Uthman was told about this, he said, write it like this, because this is the dialects of Quraysh. So Uthman sent to all the rulers of the different states of the Muslims copies of the Quran and ordered the other books to be burnt, so the people can use that one dialect, the dialect of Quraysh, without cancelling any of the different or 7 different dialects, because that would be disbelief. And we still read them today, and we still have them today. And in Ramadan, I was praying behind a sheikh that was reciting in a different dialects, which is, just like I said, they're all still there. Now we're going to examine the lies of some Christians, some desperate Christians, concerning the Quran. The Christians don't like the fact that their book, that they have many different versions of their books, and that the texture of their book was changed by their ancestors. So they try to counterattack the Muslims in the same way, which does not work. And I'll explain why. The Christians ask these questions. Number 1, they say after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, Abu Bakr ordered the collection of the Quran, and he used Zayd bin Thabit for that, while he should have used Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. And that's because the Prophet said, learn the Quran from 4 people, and one of them was Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, the second one was Salim, the third one was Mu'adh bin Jabal, and the fourth one was Ubay bin Ka'b. So they ask, why did Abu Bakr use Zayd and not Abdullah ibn Mas'ud? That must be the Quran is corrupted. Yeah, LOL. Number 1, Zayd was trustworthy, as Abu Bakr mentions when he appointed him. He says, quote, you are a smart young man and we have no suspicions about you. Number 2, the Prophet chose him and trusted him with writing the divine inspiration in his lifetime, as is stated also in the same hadith that I just quoted for Abu Bakr. He says, and, quote, and he used to write the divine inspiration for the Apostle of Allah. Number 3, Zayd had collected the whole Quran in memory and writing from the Prophet, peace be upon him, as is stated in the hadith of Anas bin Malik, as I mentioned before. Number 4, Jibril reviewed the Quran with the Prophet, peace be upon him, in his last year before his death twice, and Zayd was present in those 2 times. And Zayd wrote the last review for the Prophet, peace be upon him, and that's why it was called the copy of Zayd. And people referred to that, as is stated in the hadith, until the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And it was known in that last review what had been abrogated in the Quran and what had been fixed in the Quran, and also the exact and final order of the chapters in the Quran, as is stated also in the hadith of Imam Ahmad and Abu Dawood, as we have them today. Number 5, Zayd bin Thabit wrote and took the whole Quran from the Prophet, peace be upon him, directly, as is stated in hadith of Abu Abdullah as-Silmi in the book of Al-Burhan fi Ulum al-Quran, while the companion, the great companion Abdullah bin Mas'ud, may God be pleased with him, said in Bukhari that he took 70 chapters from the Prophet, peace be upon him, directly. So he took only 70 chapters from the Prophet directly. And that was mentioned in Bukhari, volume 6, book 61, number 522. And it was said that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud didn't memorize the Quran at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and it was said that he memorized it after the Prophet, peace be upon him's death, and this is stated in Al-Qurtubi. And some people might get confused. Then why did the Prophet, peace be upon him, say to learn the Quran from these 4 people, and one of them was Abdullah ibn Mas'ud? But that does not mean that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud had the best memory of the Quran. The Prophet, peace be upon him, is referring to his knowledge of tafsir, of translation and recitation, tafsir and qira'ah. As he also, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, states and talks about himself in the hadith of Bukhari, volume 6, book 61, number 524, where he says, there is no one that I know of the people that has more knowledge than me when it comes to where the verse came down and who it was talking about. So Ibn Mas'ud had better knowledge than Zayd bin Thabit when it came to these two things, where the verses came down and who the verses were talking about, while Zayd bin Thabit was a better memorizer and collector of the Quran than Ibn Mas'ud.